2 months ago, a horrifying car accident turned the lives of Ann Sacchetti and Paul Sacchetti upside down. In that accident, they lost their only son. To cope with the grief, they decided to leave the city and move into an old house in the countryside. From the outside, the house looked peaceful and beautiful, but inside it hid a secret that was about to drag their lives back into fear. One day, Ann was sorting through her late son's old belongings when she suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the next room. She thought it might be Paul, but the same sound echoed again, louder this time. It was coming from the basement. Curious, Ann went downstairs, but everything was silent. She came back up only to hear the noise again moments later. She searched every corner of the house but found nothing. Then suddenly a cold breeze swept through the room, and a small toy on the floor caught her eye. The same toy her son used to love. Tears filled her eyes. She felt as if her son had somehow come back to her. But just then, a dark shadow rushed past behind her. Startled, she ran after it, but the shadow was gone. A moment later, an old ball rolled down the staircase. The very same ball that once belonged to her son. Now Ann was completely convinced. Her son had returned as a spirit just to see his mother again. That night she told everything to her husband, Paul. But Paul dismissed it all as her imagination. Grief playing tricks on her mind. However, something even scarier happened that very night. Their son's photo frame suddenly fell and shattered on its own. Ann was sure now her son was angry because he had always hated that picture. Paul still believed it was all just coincidence. Then suddenly there was a knock at the door. Outside stood a couple who said they were neighbors and had come to introduce themselves. After a bit of small talk, the man, Dave, mentioned something chilling. This house had a dark past. Years ago, a man named Dubbo Dagmara lived here with his family. He had turned the house into a funeral service business. But soon rumors began spreading in the village that he was secretly selling human body parts. Angry and terrified, the villagers drove him and his family out of the town. After some time, Dagmar became an alcoholic, and one day he mysteriously died. This time, after saying this, Dave was about to leave. But just before leaving, Dave's wife secretly slipped a note into Paul's hand. It read, "This house is looking for a family. Leave here as soon as you can." Paul thought it was some kind of joke and tossed it away. But that very night, when a dark shadow moved again beneath the floor, it was certain that Ann would wake up, because the real horror of that house was just about to begin. The night was deep, but Ann couldn't sleep. She felt like someone was watching her, and that gaze seemed to come from the door of the room. Her heart started pounding faster and faster. To calm herself down, she hugged Paul and closed her eyes. But she had no idea that what she was feeling wasn't just her imagination, it was real. Because right by the door, a dark figure was actually standing there. The next morning, Paul called an electrician to fix the old boiler in the basement. Ever since they'd moved in, the boiler would heat up on its own, as if some invisible hand had turned it on. After a lot of effort, the electrician finally managed to repair the machine. But just as he restarted it, he heard faint footsteps behind him. When he turned around, he saw a dark shadow glide past the wall. He got a little nervous, but assumed it must be Paul. But when he went to the other side, he saw a woman crouching in the corner. He asked, "Who's there?" But there was only silence. The next second, the woman vanished into thin air. Terrified, he grabbed his tools. Suddenly, another shadow rushed past him. His fear now reached its peak. He was about to run when a screaming figure appeared right in front of him, and his own scream echoed through the entire house. Ann and Paul ran downstairs and found the electrician unconscious. His body was badly burned, as if someone had thrown him into fire. He was rushed to the hospital immediately. Paul called the police and filed a report, thinking the boiler had exploded. But Ann disagreed. She said, "No, it was our son's spirit. He doesn't like strangers." The next day, Ann invited two old friends over. One was her college friend, May Lewis, who claimed she could communicate with spirits, and her husband, Jacob Lewis. In the joy of meeting old friends, everyone decided to sit outside for a while and chat, so they went to a small nearby bar. But the people there were acting strangely. It was like everyone was hiding some kind of fear behind their faces. Meanwhile, Ann had also invited her son's old friend Harry and his girlfriend Daniela. She left them a note saying they could join them at the bar if they wanted, but Daniela said, "I'll just stay home and rest." So the two of them stayed back at the house. The moment Daniela stepped inside, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something about the atmosphere felt off. Trying to lighten the mood, Harry played some music and poured her a drink. After a while, the fear eased a bit, but they didn't realize someone, or rather, something, was watching their every move. As things started to feel normal again, Harry suddenly heard a strange noise coming from one of the rooms. He thought Anne or Paul were just messing around. He slowly walked toward the sound, and just as he reached the door, it slammed shut on its own. "All right, Anne, joke's over," he said, pushing the door open and stepping inside. But he didn't know that room was the old basement, the place where everything had first begun. Outside, Daniela kept waiting for him, but when he didn't return for a long time, fear took over, and she went inside. As soon as she stepped down the stairs, the color drained from her face. What she saw shook her to her very core. Her hands and feet were trembling. There was only one thought in her mind. "I have to get out of this haunted house. Now." She ran toward the car, terrified that it might not start. Thankfully, it roared to life in one go, and she sped away from there as fast as she could. But what she didn't know was that the spirit of that house wasn't about to let her go so easily. Moments later, her car suddenly spun out of control on the road and crashed horribly. At that very moment, everything inside the house returned to normal. The radio turned off, doors fixed themselves, floors spotless, as if nothing had ever happened. Night had already fallen when Anne, Paul, and their two friends returned home. The note they had left at the door was still there, so they assumed Harry and Daniela never showed up. No one thought much of it, and they went inside. Meanwhile, back at the village bar, the atmosphere had turned tense. Maddie was asking her staff what Anne and her friends had been talking about. Just then, there was a loud knock on the door. As soon as Maddie opened the door, a gunshot rang out. He froze in shock. Standing at the door were the same couple, the neighbors who had come earlier to see Anne. Their faces were burning with anger. They demanded, "Those two old men who came with Anne, what do they really do?" When they found out the men were spiritual mediums who communicated with the dead, Dave lost it completely. But behind his rage hid a dark, dangerous secret. 30 years ago, there used to be a mortuary here, owned by a man named Dagmar. That's when strange things began happening in the village. Animals started dying, people fell mysteriously ill. The villagers believed it was a curse, one that could only be lifted by sacrificing an entire family. Dagmar and his family were chosen, and they were burned alive. But the curse returned every 30 years, and this time, it had its eyes on Anne and Paul's family. If they weren't killed, the entire village could perish under the curse. That's why the neighbor couple had come, to finish the sacrifice. Meanwhile, inside Anne's house, her friend May, who could communicate with spirits, had just entered. The moment she stepped in, she felt a heavy, unsettling energy fill the room. "This isn't a normal spirit," she said. "Anne, your son isn't here. Something else is pretending to be him, tricking you into believing it's your boy." A normal person would have been terrified hearing that, but Anne and Paul laughed it off. "If it's our son, we've got nothing to be afraid of," they said, and went to bed peacefully. But as they say, when a person feels most at peace, that's when true terror shows its face. Around midnight, Paul suddenly woke up. He saw a shadow under the door, two large feet standing still. He thought maybe May's husband had come to ask something. He called out, but there was no reply. A few seconds of silence, then the door slowly creaked open on its own. No one was there. Only a cold gust of wind brushed against his face. Terrified, he turned around and screamed. Then his eyes snapped open. It was a dream, but sweat was dripping down his face, and his heart was still pounding hard. That's when he realized it wasn't just a dream. Someone, or something, had really woken him up. The next day, when his wife and May went to the market, Jacob decided that today he'd finally find out the truth. What kind of force was haunting this house? He lit a few candles and began an old ritual to summon spirits, just like the ancient occult practices. At first, everything seemed fine, but the moment Paul joined him and started chanting the mantras, the atmosphere changed completely. Paul's face went pale. He started trembling and kept repeating, "That's not my son." And then, all the candles blew out. What happened next felt straight out of a horror movie. Jacob's voice suddenly changed, his eyes turned blood red, and he said in a deep, terrifying tone, "Your son is dead. I burned them all." That's when everyone realized that Jacob was possessed. by the spirit of a man named Dagmar. When Jacob regained consciousness, he was terrified of hurting anyone, so he had himself tied to a chair. When Anne and May came home and saw him like that, they were horrified. But by then, it was too late. Dagmar's spirit had completely taken over Jacob. He started acting insane, even swallowing his own socks. I mean, if you're hungry, eat something else, right? But he just kept laughing, like someone else was controlling his body. Just then, the phone rang. It was the old lady from next door. Barely breathing, she could only say one word. "Run! They're coming back!" The very next moment, Jacob broke free from the ropes, grabbed an iron rod, and smashed his own face. Everything ended in seconds. The rest of the people tried to escape the house, but as soon as they opened the door, two terrifying spirits were standing right there. They ran upstairs in panic. Meanwhile, the neighbors arrived with weapons, thinking they could help. But little did they know, they were about to become the next victims. The spirits trapped in the basement had been freed, and anyone who dared to go down there was turned to ashes within moments. Some burn out while climbing the stairs, and some end up as nothing but a bloodstain. The entire house had now turned into a death trap. Only 2 people were left alive. Everyone else was gone. Dave screamed, "Why did you spare these 2?" Just then, Maddie tried to attack someone, but maybe it was going to be the prey. Paul quickly grabbed Anne and tried to get out of the house. But as soon as they reached downstairs, Dave was already there, standing with a strange kind of confidence in his eyes. He said, "Dagmar, finish them." And Dagmar listened, slowly moving toward them. But the shocking thing was, Dagmar wasn't after Anne or Paul. His eyes were on the man who had killed his entire family. Even after death, his soul burned with vengeance. He wrapped his hands around that man's throat and made him feel the same pain he once suffered, the pain of burning alive. Dagmar didn't harm Anne or Paul. The reason was clear. His affection for their son had softened him. He finally realized how wrong it was to satisfy his rage by killing others. Then, the basement door slowly creaked open and Dagmar's shadow vanished. Suddenly, a little girl's voice echoed, "Mom, don't be scared. I'm here." Hearing that brought Anne an unexplainable sense of peace. She immediately walked toward the basement. But remember, one mystery always stays hidden. Anne's friend had already warned her that her son's spirit wasn't there. There was another force pretending to be him, a force even stronger than Dagmar's spirit. Now, Anne and Paul were left with only 2 choices: become the sacrifice or surrender to the mysterious power. I'd like to end this story in a few words. Losing a son brings endless pain. Inside that old house lies the secret of darkness, where spirits never close their eyes, and within every sacrifice hides the next danger. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section. Also, subscribe to this channel for more horror stories like this.